Hey Miles, what's going on?
How you doing?
I'm good. How's the sound at your end of me? I've got my headphones plugged into this little baby, which is my Apogee 1. So it's what they all use, like Björk, you know, she's got this little box in her little studio there to sort of make it all sound good. Do you know what I mean?
It's good. There's a little bit of blusteriness. I don't know if
a little bit. So what happens if I do that? Does that change anything? Yeah.
Oh no, perfect. Oh, that's perfect.
Yeah? You're good?
Yeah, that's really great.
When we talk about data, we're normally talking nowadays about information stored on servers, you know, somewhere in Iceland or wherever. That is a tiny, tiny, tiny sliver, scaled to our human needs, of what could be meant by data, which literally just means things that are given. That's what data means in Latin, right? Things that are given. So, for example, right now, we're having this conversation, and the data, you know, includes the sound of my voice. It's the hum of the hard drive. It's your sweatshirt, you know. It's your visual image. The notion of data actually provides you with a way of thinking about art, actually. You could say that art, in a certain way, is a mode of kind of tuning in to the givenness of data. And what is the data-ness of what is given? What is the quality of that? How does that happen? How does data pop up in our world, right? This is sort of what modern philosophy did to establish modern science, right? Because David Hume came along and basically said, you don't actually have access to things. What you have access to is data. You know, Hume was reincarnated as the bass player of Pink Floyd. And the bass player of Pink Floyd wrote a song called Breathe. And in Breathe, Roger Waters says, all you touch and all you see is all your life will ever be. And that's exactly Humean philosophy. Maybe we find it easier to think of ourselves as data rather than as physical entities.
A lot of the work in data storage happened post-World War II. It was originally called documentation, and it came out of the fact that so much research was created during World War II, especially the Nazis that did lots of research that is unmentionable, really, but they created a lot of documents. So everyone said after then, what do we do with all these documents? How do we manage this? So we started creating these storage systems. My father started working with computers in the 1960s. He was hired as a computer programmer for General Motors in Detroit, Michigan. And he started in the mailroom after he left the American Army and got promoted eventually to be a computer programmer and spent the rest of his career working with GM in the computer world. So he brought our first computer home in 1981 when I was 6 years old. And we started learning how to program it. And that was when I learned my first programming language when I was that young. So that's when my discipline of information science really started to develop. My father passed away of dementia in 2010. He was only 67. He was one of the smartest people I've ever known. He was one of the original computer nerds. So obviously he had a lot of impact on me. So here I am, modern day computer nerd. The Jacquard loom was considered by some people to be the beginning of the history of computing. Doesn't sound like when you think about textiles that it would have anything to do with computing, but the cards themselves with little bits punched out of it were the first system of information storage. The cards contain the information for how to create a pattern, how to create a piece of clothing, how to create a blanket. So those cards were read through this machine, and the machine came out and basically printed the clothing. In the early days of computing, to run a computer program, it would sometimes take thousands of punched cards to run through a system that the computer can process to do something with. You had to send all these cards through the system. The computer would pick up the punches and figure out whether something is on or off, if it's at a 0, is it a 1. The system that my father worked with as a mainframe computer operator was very similar to what the Jacquard loom was doing 100 years prior. That kind of information storage, it's been revolutionary in the sense that we can store so much more, but that fundamental concept really has not changed.
La la la.
La la.
Turn your record level up.
Oh, I think it's stuck underneath all my clothes. What's that?
You got his treat.
Yeah.
It's weird, I can hear you.
You can hear me?
Yeah, like, it's like a voice inside my head.
That sounds a bit like Black Mirror-y.
How do you mean?
When your partner, you know the one where they die and they just become a voice in the head.
It's a bit like that. You're in mono in my left ear.
All right. Bingle. No. What's this? What's this?
So, yeah, where was the first place we went to?
Was it Snowdon? Was it our first holiday together?
Yeah, it was. It was the first time we went camping,
Yeah.
isn't it?
How long ago was that?
How long ago was that?
I mean, we've been together for 5 years. And I think we got together in March, and then I think we went in August.
In August, was it?
I think so. Climbing Snowdon was quite fun, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was good.
I think that was the first kind of proper hill walk I think I've done.
That was the first hill walk we did, yeah. I remember on the way up when I was trying to prop the hard drive on that pile of stones, and someone said, are you trying to sell it on eBay? And I said, yeah, it's an elaborate eBay pitch.
And I knew you used a couple of times.
I have, oh yeah. I often wondered if people knew what it was. I guess
I don't think I knew what it was before I started. Before you told me.
Oh really?
No.
I assumed that people would know it was a hard drive, but I guess that's just my line of work, isn't it?
Yeah, no.
Hello, hang on. How's that sound for your...
Yeah, I like your comment, as you may now have guessed, broadcast quality audio isn't really part of designer's working day. I appreciate it, thank you very much.
So what can I do for you, Miles?
I just wanted to sort of speak to you about the design, really. I guess you saw that the Lacey hard drive takes a main starring role as the protagonist of the film.
It's interesting, the pronunciation, because funny enough, here in France, we say lassie, like the dog. And
Okay.
And I think in America, they sort of go Lacey, as if it was two different words.
95.8 Capital FM, London's #1 hit music station.
In the wonderful world of hard drive designs, there's not a lot of manoeuvre space, because in general, people want their hard drives to be, well, as unobtrusive as possible. A lot of the earlier Lassie products like that with the eye, turn the product on and off. There was a kind of like a bit of mischievous childhood viciousness involved, because in the beginning you had to stick your finger in the eye, like a little kid. The funny thing about the eye isn't just an eye, it's actually a mouth as well, because all of the communication from the drive goes through the eye in terms of when it's flashing, the information it's given you. So it's not just watching you, you're watching it. In about 1993, I did a drive which was called the Cock. And the Cock was this big, tall, vertical hard drive in black plastic and with a big circular green eye, not a blue eye. And at that time, the biggest size of the Cock was 200 mega. And that was the biggest one. But the one you were interested in, with a vertical rectangle with the blue eye on the top, which was called the full-size D2, became the redesign of the Cock. These products are one of the first ones to go vertically with a hard drive instead of going horizontally. So instead of having this object that disappears, that you stick under a desk, you've got something you stick on top of your desk that has a sort of a sculptural value to it. So it's like this sort of monolithic presence, and it really is this sort of sentinel on your desk. I'm one of these people who was obviously brought up in an analog environment. There's a lot of this sort of analog elements which are very dear to me. And I like digital, and I like dematerialized, but I also like physical. I think that there's always going to be a need for the physicality of things.
I just wanted to ask what you thought the future of digital data storage is.
There's a science fiction writer called Jack McDevitt, and his protagonists, his heroes, are often archaeologists. And one of the things that they keep coming up with archaeology is there's absolutely no trace of a culture from the point it becomes digital. You imagine like 10,000 years in the future, all of the digital stuff won't exist. It's not like digging up stone, which obviously lasts forever, or wood or paper or something. You dig up a rusted hard drive with no way of getting the information off it. There's just nothing left.
Hello, can you see me?
I can see you, yes, I can.
Oh, okay. So you can also hear me, or should I try to put on the earphones? Do you hear me?
Brilliant, that's great, thank you.
Oh, great. How we handle our knowledge on digital form will lead to a big void in the history of the 21st century. At the moment, it's much more threat to our digital heritage is the huge amount of energy we use to keep this information. The internet already needs more electrical power than Germany and France together. The internet is already responsible for more than 3% of the global CO2 emission. That's twice as much as the global air traffic produces. Usage of resources to keep our internet running will lead to a point where we have to decide what to delete. And that's why we should select today what we think is necessary to be told to the future. The Memory of Mankind archive is in a salt mine in the Alps, in Hallstatt, Austria. That's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And archaeologists find the traces of our ancestors digging for salt for 7,000 years. And I thought this would be a good place to have an archive where we store our history from today for the next thousands of years.
Sound recording. Sound recording.
The way we store it is in an analog way on ceramic data carriers, especially developed for this project, with contents which are pre-selected by different institutions. and also a big collection of individual contents. That means it's a collection of stories that people contribute, which they think is important to be kept. And this individual contents builds the first ever bottom-up told history, which is a significant part of the project.
Who do you imagine will be the people that discover this archive?
Producing this huge storytelling project, of course you must ask yourself, who are the recipients? Because we don't want some, let's say, immature society intrude into this archive without the capability of understanding the content. When we say this is for intelligent technical society in the future, we assume there is one. But the question is, are we allowed to assume that?
In H.G. Wells' The Time Machine, in chapter 11, where the time traveller goes far, far into the future after escaping the Morlock under the earth. I think he's leaning on the temporal accelerator and he ends up on this shore under a red sun. The sun has expanded, it's become this kind of bloated red giant. The earth is dark, there's almost no discernible animal life. He's just standing on a frozen shore beside a still, apparently empty ocean. At the core of that passage, there is an encounter with a creature. It's kind of some tentacled cephalopod-like thing that he sees in the waves. The way Wells describes it, flopping, awkward, it's not even transcribable, readable in terms of our kind of being. The very awkwardness of it is perhaps testifies to the human perspective on it rather than its nature. confront something that's alien, but he doesn't know how alien. And in fact, he doesn't even reflect on his encounter. He merely feels it. He feels a kind of the terrible cold of this place, the terror of the darkness, and this sense of proximity to something that he doesn't understand. So it's an encounter with the radically alien or the radically non-human. He's gone beyond the period, not merely which there were humans around, but which, in a sense, anything that could be readable or inscribed is around. It's kind of post-history, in a sense. There's something paradoxical about that Wells is already trying to adopt a human perspective on a reality that is, in all the ways that matter, post-human, in a sense, post-anything like us. I'll just let this ring.
Pick up if you want.
No, it's all right. They can leave a voicemail. It's probably a cold call. If they're not ringing my mobile. Yeah, I'll catch that later. So.
Where do we go next?
Where did we go next?
Yeah. Was it Froome?
Did we go down to Froome?
Or was it Southend?
Maybe in Southend, actually. I think when we went out with your dad.
Yeah, on the Broomway.
Yeah.
That was nice going there with you, because, like, I'd obviously lived in the area grew up in the area.
Yeah.
But had never known about that walk.
The Broomway?
Yeah.
That was me geeking out and having a look at OS map.
I thought it was that Rog McFarlane.
Oh, it was, yeah.
The old ways.
It was, yeah.
Because is it the most, like, dangerous right of way in the country or something?
Most dangerous public footpath or something.
Yeah.
Because of the tide.
It's weird that you can grow up in an area for your whole life and it takes somebody from outside the area to show you it in a way.
Yeah. I think I found that when I took you down to Froome, like King Alfred's Tower.
Yeah, that was incredible.
We walked up there.
Was that by the time you had a second Lacey?
Yeah, I think I had a few maybe by that point.
Because they sort of kept looking really beat up where you'd been out
I
filming.
know, there's not much continuity in the film.
Can see this works better.
Okay, do you hear me?
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, that's much better.
Okay, that's good. I'm Colombian, so I like to talk. there is no like film. And that's why the directors love film, because you have all the range of color, the dynamic range is so good. But color film is not suitable for long-term preservation. The dyes, the emulsion that covers this is estimated to last for 100 years. But with the black and white film, it has been tested and proven to last for more than 500 years. And even the polyester base is more than 1,500. So that's why microfilm archivists trust the black and white film. There is a lot of fear in the motion picture industry to keep the master of movie sounds on digital storage mediums. Today with digital technology, the motion picture industry can keep the masters on hard drives, but this has the problems of obsolescence. So the motion picture industry trusts film as a storage medium to preserve digital content. But of course, there is some assumptions. We assume there are computers in the future, and there are programmers. If nothing of that exists, it's because we have been really going down in civilization. It won't be possible to decode. We might use the film for making fire.
So, as I understand it, you've got these ceramic tablets, and they're in salt mines. Could you describe the process of how you transfer the information onto the clay tablet?
Yeah, there's one example. This is ceramic, and in that case, it's a 4-color print with ceramic stain. The second method we use is ceramic microfilm, where we can also print photos on it. But what is much more interesting is that we can compress a book to a 200th of its volume. So you can, let's say, have the whole Harry Potter collection on less than 2 ceramic microfilm from 20 centimeters and 1 millimeter thick each. I mean, the cuneiform tablets from the Babylonians, they are at least 5,000 years resistant, and they're still readable. So these ceramic data carriers are definitely the most resistant long-term data storage humanity has ever used. Much more temperature resistant than any other long-term storage method ever so far.
Hi, Miles.
Hello, Georgia.
Miles, hi.
Hello, Peter.
Miles, can you hear me well now?
Hey, Yanu.
How are you? Are you in your office? That's an interesting setting, huh?
It's my studio, and it's on the south side of Glasgow.
As part of 27 million euros, Pickle developed a writer that can write any kind of information on film. National Archives of Mexico and Brazil have decided to store their most valuable data on the pickle film in our Arctic World archive. So we figured Svalbard would be an amazing location to have the first digital vault in the world for the most important information. There already is a Svalbard seed vault, which has been existing for quite a few years, which stores all the important seeds from all the varieties of plants around the world. And then we thought, okay, there wouldn't be any better place to create a similar vault for the purpose of ensuring that the content that is saved there can withstand up to 500 years longevity. While we cannot speculate what will happen in 100 years or 500 years from now, it's very good that we still have storage mediums from which we can read and actually be able to see the truth captured in a time capsule.
Our research was DNA fountain and showed how you can use DNA as a medium to store information. DNA is such an attractive medium to store information for three reasons. The first one is that DNA will never go obsolete. My bar mitzvah was recorded on the VCR tape. I think only my mom still has a VCR to play the cassette. Second, DNA can survive for thousands of years. We even have skeletons that were preserved for 200,000 years, but we can still read their DNA because it's such a robust molecule. The third reason, DNA is far more compact than any other storage device that we use today. We reached a concentration of 215 petabytes of DNA on 1 gram. If you think that the world's data right now is in the order of 10 to the power of 24, it means that if you take all the world's data, it's about 10 tons of DNA. Something that you can put in a truck, basically.
Normal light transmits through glass without any problem, but lasers can develop very intense light. When intensity of light is very high, you can write information inside the glass. We can write voxels. And voxel is basically pixel produced in the volume, so it gives 3 degrees of freedom in calling information. Our technology, 5D memory crystal, can store a lot of information. In a disk of a Blu-ray size, we can store 360 terabytes, and plus extreme durability. So we heated our 5D memory crystal to high temperatures, 1000 degrees. We extrapolated a lifetime at room temperature. At temperatures about 180 degrees centigrade. The lifetime comparable to the lifetime of universe, which is 13.8 billion years. Yeah, we're going to have a Guinness World Record for this.
So what things have you actually stored on the crystal?
We managed to write on our 5D memory crystal Isaac Asimov Foundation trilogy. The idea of the book that it's very important to archive all our knowledge in case of some kind of catastrophe which could happen. And this book inspired Noah Spivak, who created Arc Mission Foundation, to archive the most important human documents in space. this book also inspired Elon Musk. So ARC Mission Foundation managed to convince Elon Musk to launch Isaac Asimov Foundation trilogy on our 5D memory crystal to space in a Tesla Red Roadster car, in a SpaceX Falcon Heavy rocket, where we'll orbit Sun for millions of years of time, or maybe even more. So this is a quite symbolic event. So if you would like to be contacted or receive messages from the future, so you should keep in touch with me.
I certainly will. Maybe this film is a message from the future to me.
Yeah. This is I don't know.
And then what year did we go to Lindisfarne?
Was that when we were living in Brockley?
Was it?
Yeah, pretty sure.
Never holiday ruined by having the camera there.
I didn't mind that so much. I think it's when we went up Ben Vane with the camera.
Yeah.
That's when it started to get to me. Always having the camera with us. So by that time, the camera and Lacey had been coming around with us for 3 years.
Yeah.
And it felt like we went to these amazing places and we did stuff together. But then when we got to the top, or when we got to the moment that was spectacular, instead of having, a moment with each other and enjoying it with each other, you went into work mode and, got the camera up and stuff, and it just felt...
Yeah, and that camera...
It wasn't fun anymore. The camera, instead of, enabling us to go places and sort of being a document of what we were doing, it felt like the camera took over. The hard drive sort of became the third person in our relationship, really. It made me feel angry.
Yeah.
Have a finger.
Well, the information science opinion of data is that there's basically a hierarchy of data, information, knowledge, and wisdom. So data is just the numbers, the bits, the stuff that's out there. Once a human processes it, it turns into information. Once we apply that information to something in our lives, it's knowledge, and then wisdom is where, we've finally done the most that we can with what we know. So data is just, to me, is just stuff out there. It doesn't mean anything until a human has applied something to it or made an association with it. Most of the research that I do is qualitative in nature, but there has been this really big push recently, obviously, which I'm sure is part of why you're doing this work, is the issue around big data and quantification and visualizing it. I think the idea behind it is that we can try to get lots of information about lots of people and lots of things all at once and sort of condense it down into statistics or patterns or whatever. But the weakness in that is that it doesn't allow for individual differences. Sometimes the outliers, the individual differences, and the little anomalies are just as interesting, but you have no way to deal with them because they get lost in creating these big patterns.
Have you got any examples of what knowledge have you included in the archive?
An important part of the MOM project is as I call it, the bottom-up told history. So this is some very personal content usually. For example, intimate confessions like the girl who explained how a particular video game prevented her from committing suicide, or a love letter of a pregnant woman to her still unborn kids. And these love letters were contributed by the now adult kids. The Memory of Mankind project is not particularly to give a backup of our knowledge, because knowledge evolves and then you have to update the knowledge. These individual contributions depict our era in a very holistic way, interestingly. But just a second, I think there's someone at the door. Just a second.
The fact that we are in a position to document and record our world in ever finer detail is, in a sense, creating a new kind of world. Really, from the dawn of civilization, if not before, we've been externalizing our minds outside our skin bags. The critical post-humanist might say, well, in a sense, our minds have been outsourced to our environment and to artificial environments like libraries and to various kinds of device or artifact. A lot of processes which we'd normally think of as mental are actually accomplished using various kinds of archival or inscriptional device. Like to do really serious geometry or mathematics, you can't rely on your bare brain because there are just too many variables and too many complex relationships. So you have to externalize those in some sort of durable form. So you could argue in a sense that we've always been partly technological creatures. We've never just been biological. We've always, in a sense, exteriorized ourselves through some kind of cultural, physical medium. Transhumanism is the idea that we should use technological means such as artificial intelligence, genomic nanotechnology to improve and enhance human capacities, such as the idea that we should become disembodied creatures existing on computer mainframes rather than biological bodies. But the transhumanists have kind of fixated on the idea of improving the human, assuming in a sense that the long-run effects of those technological processes will still be something recognisably like us. That in a sense the post-human is really just a better improved us. The interesting thing about the post-human is that from our current position it's indeterminate. And what I call speculative post-humanism thinks about the possibility of a radical divergence of the post-human and the human. Technological and various biological change could result in something not merely that isn't like us, but we don't even understand, or that we couldn't understand without becoming like it. Take various conditions for being human, such as mastering a language or being gendered, and it would be fairly easy to find exceptions to that. So not all biological humans necessarily master language, not all biological humans have an assignable gender. So it seems reasonable to think that there may be no definite set of conditions, or you can reduce humanity to some kind of essence. So you've got a clear dividing line between the human and the non-human that philosophers could somehow discover from their armchairs. To question whether agency or subjectivity can be reduced to a certain formal structure which can be then exemplified in different kinds of body or forms of life. Because we can no longer assume that the future has a purpose or a direction which is in some sense humanly oriented, that the future has, if you like, our face is written in the stars. And one can no longer assume that that future ought to reflect our current values, because it remains to be seen whether there is a single ethical position from which that non-human perspective and our human perspective can be compared or evaluated. Do we know that the human perspective is the only one which is worthy of moral consideration?
there's a fundamental crack in reality between things and data. The notion of data goes far beyond the notion of handily compressed into binary code bits of information about something. Data is much more profound than that and much weirder than that. For me, things have two aspects. They have a kind of like a being aspect and an appearing aspect. In other words, what things are and how they appear, right? Now, what's interesting is that what things are is totally and utterly tied to how they appear, and vice versa. Now, this is a bit of a paradox because on the one hand, things are very different from how they appear, and yet how they appear is exactly what they are, you see. So there's this weird duality where a thing is kind of like a true lie about itself. The way I visualize it is by thinking of a Mobius strip. When you make a Mobius strip, which is a sort of twisted loop where there's no inside or outside anymore, basically when you try to locate where the twist is in the Mobius strip, you don't find it. Where the twist begins, the twist is sort of everywhere. And it's the same with how things are. The appearance aspect is everywhere in the thing, like the twist in a Mobius strip. It's that way. So it's not true to say that things are like lamps that are then decorated with appearances, like candy decorating a cupcake or something like that. And it's also not true to say that things are kind of blank screens waiting for some kind of probably inevitably human being access projection onto them. We make things real by mathematizing them, by measuring them, you know. We make things real by having economic relations with them. That's the Marxist version. We make things real by involving them in our world project, which is your Heidegger version, and so on and so on. In object-oriented ontology, we're doing something a bit provocative. We're using this word object, and often when people hear it, they think of the worst possible thing that could possibly be, which is being an object. Why? Because we have this rather anthropocentric kind of imperialistic attitude towards other things. We think that if you talk about objects, you want to reduce everything to manipulable lumps, but that's precisely what we don't want to do. What we want to do is show that nothing is just a blank lump waiting for you to manipulate it to make it real. Things have their own frequency. They have their own appearance, they have their own kind of reality from their own side. And this is possible to know and say in light of modern science and modern philosophy as opposed to despite it. Things are richly and sparklingly and sort of weirdly alively exactly what they are already. So, you know, as they say in Star Trek, to be continued. So,
hello?
Hello.
Hello, are you there?
Yes, I can hear you, but you can't hear me.
Go on then. In you go. So, I had a bit of an ulterior motive for the walk as to why I wanted to talk to you about some of the places we've been during the making of this film.
Right.
Because it's sort of a bit of an experiment in the idea of transactive memory.
What's transactive memory?
So transactive memory is a way of encoding, storing and retrieving information between individuals.
Right.
And it was first studied in romantic couples. So each partner is aware of what the other partner may remember better of an experience.
Right.
You know, so say we went away, I might remember what food and drink we had, whereas you might remember
what we talked about
when we were there.
Okay. That's looking at each other in a not massively romantic way. It's quite a reductive way to look at a relationship.
No, it's not. I was interested in this as a concept, considering the subject of the film.
Is that how you see me? Am I just a hard drive too?
Come on.
Data for no reason is a great summary of what art actually is. It's this sort of data for no reason. And in fact, there's always a kind of no reason quality about data because things are just given. They just are. They just pop right there without you having to cook them up or switch them on or make them real or anything. So data for no reason, that's the actual reality we live in.
Maybe that's the next generation of information retrieval as well, is that something is implanted in our body, maybe we don't have to work as hard to get it out because it communicates with the computer that we're wearing. It's fascinating to think about.
I think you just probably take what I say, get a bit annoyed that I've not quite said what you wanted, and edit it to make it more like what you do want.
Maybe I've done that with some of the other interviews, but not this one.
You can't admit that.
Because the question that sort of comes to my mind is, you're a facsimile of the driver, the driver's a facsimile of you. Have you started wearing like a big polo-neck ribbed sweater?
I'm wearing a big flashing blue mask.
Why memory of mankind and not humankind? The acronym MOM is female. And what I like very much is the image of storing our stories in Mother Earth's womb. When we say we store it deep in the mountain.
I'm not even sure that the role of the philosopher is something that can be projected into an indeterminate future like this. And it doesn't mean that I don't believe that the future is in some sense real, but our conceptual frameworks for dealing with it actually may be much more fragile and historically bounded, we tend to think.
I was looking into your movies.
Oh yeah, did you take a look at them?
Kind of different.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Would you want to see the picture? So you have a film reel that looks like this, where you can store visual files and also these high definition QR codes.
On our drop of DNA, we put a computer operating system. We also stored an Amazon gift card of $50, and we stored a computer virus just for fun. And we put the French movie, The Arrival of a Train, that was filmed in 1895. Now it's the first movie on DNA.
The first document we stored was a PDF file of our paper. This is the most important document, by the way. Maybe you can see it here. It's PDF file about 200 kilobytes, or maybe 300 kilobytes. So, but historically, it was the first digital document which we proved then potentially survive human race. If you know this interstellar movie, it's possible if, for example, to send one of these into black hole, into other dimensions.